President Trump says a deal could be just days away. But tonight, he says Iran shot down a US military Apache helicopter. Both pilots survived, yet Trump is now promising a response. So here's the question: if peace is getting closer, why does the war keep finding new ways to escalate? And what happens when diplomacy collides with events nobody can control?
President Trump just provided an update on that U.S. military helicopter crash. He said, "I have just been informed by our great military that last night Iranians shot down one of our highly sophisticated Apache helicopters while patrolling over the Strait of Hormuz. There were 2 pilots involved. Both are safe and uninjured. Nevertheless, the United States must, of necessity, respond to this attack. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump." I want to go straight to the White House to Elena Treen. Elena, what more are you hearing about what the president might be referring to in terms of responding?
Yeah, I think what this response will entail is obviously the key question here. We haven't gotten any more information other than what the president had just shared on social media. But I think one of the key parts of this post, Dana, is that he is saying that it was the Iranians that shot down this Apache helicopter. That is more information, of course, than we have gotten. This statement from CENTCOM this morning, all it had said was that the cause of the incident is under investigation, not giving any information about who was responsible. Well, Trump is now saying it is the Iranians who were responsible for downing that helicopter and that they have to respond, the United States, out of necessity. Very much unclear, again, what he means by this, if he means potential strikes or something else. But that can definitely, of course, be a major complicating factor after a very few tense days in this war, really, after, of course, we saw Israel and Iran exchanging fire, the president getting them to back off. Now he's been optimistic. The latest we heard from him this morning, very optimistic about a deal, but now saying he needs to respond to this. And I do want to provide some information about the importance of these Apaches, because this marks the downing of this helicopter, the first time an Apache was lost since this war began. Typically, they have been responsible for precision attacks on some of these Iranian small boats we know that have been operating in the Strait of Hormuz, the United States using them as part of the Iranian blockade. So all to say, it's unclear what this response is going to be. I think we have a lot of work to do in our reporting with our sources on what this is going to look like. And I also think the fact that the president is even coming out and saying that there needs to be a response is a huge signal in how he's trying to handle this entire moment at a very fragile time for the ceasefire negotiations.
What began as a helicopter incident is now raising a much bigger concern. Because this story isn't really about one aircraft. It's about what keeps happening every time a deal appears to be within reach. Officials say Iran still retains capabilities many believed had been degraded. And if that's true, how much progress has really been made toward ending this conflict? Because every new escalation raises the same uncomfortable question: are we watching isolated setbacks, or a peace process that keeps colliding with reality?
Yeah, guys, we now know from 2 U.S. officials that it was an Iranian drone that took down this Apache helicopter that was operating around the Strait of Hormuz. And now we're told this is an Iranian Shahed drone. This is one of thousands of these types of one-way attack drones that Iran still has in its arsenal, despite the fact that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the Pentagon have insisted that Iran's military capabilities have been heavily degraded. And again, this is a reminder, too, of the threat that Iran still poses, not just to U.S. vessels and aircraft operating in that key waterway, but also the commercial vessels that have not yet started to regularly transit for fear of attacks from the Iranian regime. And so this is a new detail we're learning today, because earlier this morning, the Pentagon said it was still investigating what happened, what led to this crash of the Apache helicopter around the Strait of Hormuz. We now know, thanks to President Trump's tweet and subsequent confirmation from U.S. officials, that it was an Iranian drone. Now, what remains unclear at this stage, though, is what the intent was, if this was an intentional attack by the Iranians or if it was a collision of some kind. But obviously, if you read the president's statement, that Truth Social post right there, it doesn't really seem that he sees a difference between the two, and that he feels it's important that the U.S. aircraft was hit by an Iranian drone and that the U.S. now, quote, must respond.
And Zach, do we know what options are being weighed as a response?
Yeah, Boris, the military has been developing a series of options. We've seen them also respond to other Iranian attacks, aggressive actions around the Strait of Hormuz over the last few days even. It will be interesting to see if the U.S. response is ultimately proportional or if Donald Trump does order the military to carry out something more significant. We know the military has been developing a target list of potential targets around the Strait of Hormuz, things like these drone launch sites, missile launch sites, things that are key to Iran's ability to pose a threat to vessels operating in and out of the Strait of Hormuz, which is effectively how they've shut down that key waterway since the early days of this conflict. So it ultimately will be up to President Trump, though, just to decide how to move forward here. The key thing to watch for is, will this response be proportional, or will this be something that escalates the conflict further?
The helicopter may be the headline, but it may not be the story. For weeks, officials have projected confidence that diplomacy is working and a deal is near. Yet every new incident seems to produce another obstacle, an attack, a threat, a retaliation, another promise that peace is just around the corner. Which is why the real debate is no longer about a helicopter. It's whether events on the battlefield are moving faster than the people trying to negotiate an end to the war.
Zach, last month you and our colleague Natasha Bertrand reported that Iran had restarted building drones. It had re-upped its drone production during the ceasefire. Is there any reflection on the part of administration officials that this ceasefire being dragged out now, weeks and weeks, is giving Iran these capabilities?
Yeah, Brianna, that's something that we hear from sources and U.S. officials in private for sure, but we have not heard the president in particular or Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth voice the similar concern, really painting a more optimistic and a more confident view of the damage that the U.S. military has inflicted on the Iranians' capabilities. But like you mentioned, we reported that the Iranians have been using this time, this ceasefire, to reconstitute many of its military capabilities, and it's already restarted production on some of these attack drones that, as we've seen today, are capable of taking down an Apache helicopter, also a threat to U.S. Navy.
The administration maintains a deal is still
possible.
A deal.
Yeah, we've heard so many times that a deal is in the offing. Sometimes last week he said potentially as soon as this weekend. He told farmers in Wisconsin that the fertilizer costs that skyrocketed because of the war would be down in 90 days because he was going to take care of it.